The steam is thick here, a heavy white curtain that separates the world of the living from the world of shadows. It smells faintly of sulfur and rosewater, a cloying sweetness masking the metallic tang of iron that is beginning to pool on the marble floor. In the center of this misty chamber sits an old man. He is naked, his body withered by age and the rigorous asceticism of his final years. A landscape of protruding ribs and pale, loose skin that tells the story of 70 years of endurance. He does not look like a man who once ruled the world from behind a curtain. He looks like a fragile bird, waiting for the winter to end. He is the philosopher, he is the tutor, he is the exile. But in this moment, he is simply a dying man who is taking a very long time to leave. He gazes at the water in the bath. It is murky, warm, and inviting, a liquid threshold. He has spent a lifetime writing about this precise moment, rehearsing it in the quiet, terrifying hours of the night when his lungs would seize and his breath would refuse to come. The physicians called his condition asthma, but he knew it by a more intimate name, practicing how to die. Every wheeze, every desperate gasp for air in his youth was a drill for this final performance. Now the rehearsal is over. The curtain has risen. He rests his hands on the edge of the basin. The veins in his arms are open. The crimson ribbons that flow from them are sluggish, hesitant. His blood, chilled by age and a diet of simple fruits and water, refuses to run with the urgency the emperor's command requires. He watches the slow drip with a detached curiosity, as if observing a natural phenomenon, a river drying up in the summer heat. It is ironic, he thinks, that he, who taught that time is the most precious commodity, is now granted such a surplus of it in his final hour. He turns his gaze to the scribe, who sits on a stool just outside the thickest steam, clutching a wax tablet, the stylus poised and trembling. The scribe's eyes are red. The philosopher smiles, a gentle, ghostly expression. Right, he whispers. His voice is raspy but distinct. He does not dictate a will of coins and estates. Those are gone, or they are irrelevant. He dictates the pattern of a life. He tells them that he leaves them the only thing of true value he has left, the image of his life, not the titles, not the vast wealth that fueled the rumors of his enemies, but the mind that strove to align itself with nature. He looks at his friends, men of status who hide their faces in their togas. Where are your maxims of philosophy now? He chides them gently. Where is the reason that has been prepared through so many years of study against the impending evils? He asks them not to weep for him, but to recognize that this is the moment for which they have all been preparing. The pain begins to mount, a dull, throbbing ache as the circulation fails. He splashes a little of the warm water onto the floor, a libation. To Jupiter the Liberator, he breathes. It is not a plea for salvation. It is an acknowledgement of freedom. The door is open. The steam swirls around him, and in that whiteness the present dissolves, the marble walls fade. The weeping of the slaves recedes, replaced by the sound of different water, a different time. The mist clears, and he is no longer dying in Rome. He is standing in the golden light of a distant province. The light here is sharp, the blinding brilliance of Hispania. He is a boy again, standing on the banks of the Baetis River in Corduba. The air smells of dust and pressed olives, a rich, oily scent that hangs heavy in the heat. The river moves slowly, a sluggish serpent carrying the wealth of the earth toward the insatiable maw of Rome. He is a small child, frail and thin, while his brothers run with the vigor of youth, shouting in the atrium. He sits in the shade of the peristyle, clutching his chest. The air is a reluctant guest in his lungs. Even here, under the vast open sky of Spain, he feels the walls closing in. He watches the olive trees. They are ancient, gnarled things, their roots twisting into the rocky soil like arthritic fingers. They do not ask for easy rain or soft earth. They struggle, they endure, they extract sweetness from the stone. This is the first lesson of his homeland. Endurance produces fruit. His father, Seneca the Elder, is a man of booming voice, and traditional Roman values, a rhetorician who worships the power of the spoken word. To him, a man is defined by his ability to hold a crowd, to shape destiny through eloquence. But the boy is drawn to the silence. He finds refuge in the arms of his aunt. She is the one who cradles him during the coughing fits that leave him exhausted and pale. She whispers stories to him, not of political victories, but of the stars, of the great order of the universe. In her arms he learns that dependency is not weakness if it is met with love. He learns that the mind can remain calm, even when the body is in revolt. "Why do I struggle to breathe?" he asks her, his voice a wheeze. "Because the breath is alone," she might have said. "It is not yours to keep. You must be grateful for every moment it returns to you." This idea takes root in him. At night, when the asthma comes, he lies in his bed, staring up at the ceiling, fighting the panic. "What was before me will happen again after me," he tells himself, forcing his heart to slow down. "The lamp is not worse off when it is extinguished than before it was lighted." He survives the nights. He survives the childhood that seemed so precarious. The family moves to Rome, the center of the world. The journey is long, the sea tossing their ship like a toy, mirroring the turbulence in his own chest. Rome is a sensory assault, the smoke, the noise, the crushing humanity. But for the young student, it is a library of souls. He throws himself into study. He realizes that while his father teaches how to speak, he wants to learn how to live. He wants to know how to navigate the storm without sinking. The lecture hall is cool and smells of papyrus and old cedar wood. The young man sits at the feet of his masters, his eyes burning with a hunger that food cannot satisfy. He has found the Stoics, and through them he has found a way to breathe. Attalus the Stoic stands at the front of the room, a man who wears his poverty like a royal robe. A king, Attalus says, is not the man with the golden crown. A king is the man who desires nothing. The words strike him with the force of a revelation. Desire is the chain. If I want nothing, I am free. Then there is Sotion, who speaks of the kinship of all living things. "Why make your body a tomb for other creatures?" Sotion asks. The arguments are seductive. The young scholar resolves to purify himself. He abandons meat, embracing a diet of vegetables, figs, and simple grains. He finds that his mind clears, his body feels lighter. He practices poverty, sleeping on a hard mattress, testing himself against the softness of the age. He walks the streets of Rome, a secret vegetarian in a city of butchers, feeling a quiet superiority, a fortress built within his own chest. But the world intrudes. The Emperor Tiberius, old and paranoid, sits on the throne. Foreign cults are being purged. The dietary restrictions of the Pythagoreans whisper of strange rites. To be different is to be dangerous. His father, ever the pragmatist, intervenes. "Do not make yourself a target," he warns. "Philosophy is noble, but survival is necessary." Reluctantly, the young philosopher abandons his vegetarianism. But he does not abandon the discipline. He learns a subtler lesson. To be in the world, but not of it. He learns to wear the toga of a Roman citizen while wearing the armor of a Stoic underneath. He throws himself into the study of the natural world to escape the madness of the political one. He writes about earthquakes, about the rise and fall of the Nile. He seeks to understand the logos, the rational principle that orders the universe. If he can understand the storm outside, perhaps he can master the storm within. He demystifies the terrors of the gods, replacing fear with physics. This, too, is a spiritual exercise. To know the cause is to cease to fear the effect. The young ascetic becomes the man of words, his tongue, sharpened by the rhetoric of his father and weighted by the wisdom of the porch, becomes a formidable weapon. He rises. The crowds gather to hear him speak. His style is new, rapid, pointed, full of epigrams that stick in the mind like burrs. He speaks of virtue, but with a style that seduces the crowd. He becomes a celebrity. He walks the forum, and heads turn. But in the Rome of the Julio-Claudians, to shine is to invite the darkness. Caligula sits on the throne now, the mad emperor who wishes the Roman people had but a single neck. Caligula considers himself an orator. He cannot abide a rival. He listens to the philosopher speak in the Senate, hears the applause, and his face twists in a sneer. The order comes down: execute him. The reason is trivial: a speech well delivered that outshone the emperor. The envy of a tyrant is a death sentence. The philosopher prepares himself. He has practiced for this. He checks his breath. It is steady. He is ready to open his veins. But fate intervenes in the form of a woman. A mistress of the emperor whispers in Caligula's ear, "Why kill him? He is a dying man already. Look at him. The consumption, the asthma. He will be dead in a month. Do not waste the executioner's blade on a corpse." Caligula laughs. The death sentence is lifted. The philosopher is spared because he is deemed too weak to live. He walks away from the precipice, breathing the air that was almost denied him. He understands now, with a clarity that burns, that his life is not his own. It belongs to fortune, and she can reclaim it on a whim. He lives on borrowed time. Every day is a reprieve. He retreats from the glare of the forum. He writes. He consolidates his inner citadel. He watches Caligula fall, watches the stammering Claudius pulled from behind a curtain to rule the world. He thinks he is safe. He is wrong. The blow falls not from the emperor, but from the empress. Messalina accuses him of adultery with the emperor's niece. It is a lie to clear the board of rivals. The Senate condemns him to death. Claudius commutes it to exile. The destination is Corsica, a barren rock, a savage island of jagged peaks and impenetrable scrub. He is stripped of his career, his home, his friends. He stands on the shore, looking back toward Italy. The silence here is absolute. The only sound is the wind hissing through the maquis, the dense aromatic shrubland of myrtle and rock rose. The scent is overwhelming, a resinous perfume that the sun bakes out of the earth. The ambitious orator now has for an audience only the goats and the seabirds. He falls into despair. He writes letters, pleading, flattering, pouring out slime and honey, debasing himself in hopes of a return. It is the low point of his soul. The Stoic armor has cracked. But slowly the island begins to work on him. The silence becomes a teacher. He watches the stars wheel overhead, brighter here than in the smog of Rome. He realizes that the universe is the same everywhere. The mind can reach the heavens from any corner of the earth, he tells himself. He realizes that he has carried his own tormentor with him, his own ambition. You are running away in your own company. He begins to engage with the wildness of the place. He smells the cistus flowers, sticky with gum, opening their crumpled petals to the morning sun. He finds a different kind of freedom. He is no longer a slave to the emperor's mood. He is a subject of nature. He writes De Ira on anger, here dissecting the madness that drove Caligula and now infects his own heart. He learns to cool his own blood. For 8 years he is a ghost. He prepares to become dust in a foreign land. And then the wheel turns again. A ship arrives. Messalina is dead. A new empress sits on the throne, Agrippina, the sister of Caligula, a woman of steel and ambition. She remembers the philosopher. She needs a mind to sharpen the weapon she is forging. That weapon is her son, the boy Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, the boy who will become Nero. He is recalled. He returns to Rome not as a beggar but as a master. He is appointed tutor to the future master of the world. He looks at the boy, 12 years old. Fleshy, artistic, eager to please, but with a flicker of cruelty in his eyes. The philosopher sees the danger. He is tasked with taming a lion cub. He knows the madness that runs in this bloodline like a dark river. He joins forces with Burrus, the Praetorian prefect, the soldier and the philosopher, the sword and the pen. They form a pact. We will govern the world through the boy. We will keep the monster of tyranny asleep. We will craft a golden age. He walks the halls of the Palatine with the stride of power. He is wealthy, immensely so. He owns estates, vineyards, gardens that rival the emperor's. He preaches the simple life, the poverty of desire, while dining on silver plates. The paradox gnaws at him. His enemies whisper, "Hypocrite." They ask, how can a Stoic possess 300 million sestertii? He defends himself, but his voice lacks the certainty of the lecture hall. "I am not a sage," he writes. "I am just a patient in the same hospital as you, discussing our disease." He tells himself that wealth is an indifferent, something to be used for good, if present, but not mourned if lost. But the gold feels heavy in his hands. He tries to pour his philosophy into the boy. He writes De Clementia, telling Nero that the sword should stay in the scabbard. Mercy is the only virtue that makes a man equal to the gods. For 5 years it seems to work. The quinquennium Neronis. The world is at peace. The Senate breathes freely. The philosopher stands at the emperor's right hand, whispering wisdom. He creates the illusion of the good prince. But the illusion is fragile. He sees the rivalry between Agrippina and her son. The mother who clawed her way to power is pushed aside. She is furious. Nero is fearful. The philosopher stands in the middle, walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. He uses all his Stoic training to keep his balance, but the rope is fraying. The snap is sudden and violent. Britannicus, the rightful heir, dies at a dinner party. Epilepsy, Nero claims, his eyes cold. The philosopher looks at the blue flush of poison on the corpse and says nothing. He drafts the speech explaining the death. The first compromise was a crack. Now the dam is breaking. Then, the unthinkable, the matricide. Nero decides his mother must die. The plot is grotesque, a ship designed to collapse at sea. But Agrippina survives the wreck, swimming to shore. Nero is terrified. He summons Seneca and Burrus. "She will come for me!" the emperor wails. The philosopher looks at the soldier. Burrus shakes his head. The guard will not touch her. So the order is given to the admiral. They break down her door. She points to her womb. "Strike here," she commands. "Strike the place that bore him." And who must explain this to the world? The philosopher. He writes the letter to the Senate. He justifies the unjustifiable. He uses his golden eloquence to paint a murder as a necessity of state. He sits in his study, the stylus heavy in his hand. He has become the apologist for a matricide. All the beautiful words about mercy turn to ash in his mouth. He is trapped. He is the richest man in Rome, and the poorest. He is a prisoner in a palace of gold. He watches Nero descend into true tyranny. Burrus dies, poisoned perhaps. The philosopher is alone now. He tries to leave. He offers Nero his vast fortune. "Take it all," he pleads. "Let me retire. I am old. I am tired." Nero smiles, that terrifying, boyish smile. "No," the emperor says. "To take your wealth would make me look greedy. You are my guide." He embraces the philosopher with a quote, "kiss of death." He retreats to his room. He stops eating the rich foods of the court, terrified of poison. He lives on simple fruits and running water. He is back to the asceticism of his youth, not out of piety but fear. The gilded cage has closed. In the shadow of the axe, his mind turns to time. He sees the people of Rome running through the streets, guarding their money with their lives, but squandering their hours. He writes De brevitate vitae, on the shortness of life. "It is not that we have a short time to live," he writes, "but that we waste a lot of it." He looks at his own life, the years wasted in the antechambers of the powerful. He mourns the time lost. He writes letters to Lucilius during these final years. They are a lifeline. He writes to save his own soul. He dissects his days. He talks about the noise of the bathhouse below his apartment. He uses it as an exercise. I force my mind to pay attention to itself. He reads the ancients. I can choose my ancestors, he says. I can be a son of Zeno, of Socrates. He finds peace in the indifference of nature. The wind does not care about Nero. The end draws near. The air in Rome is thick with conspiracy. The Pisonian conspiracy is uncovered. Names are named. The philosopher's name is whispered. Was he part of it? Perhaps, or perhaps he simply knew and said nothing. It does not matter. Innocence is no defense against a tyrant who needs a scapegoat. He watches the soldiers surround his villa. He sees the glint of their armor through the olive trees. He is ready. He has built the inner fortress. He recalls his own teachings on anger. Anger is a temporary madness. He will not be angry at Nero. To be angry is to admit that the world has the power to hurt you. He refuses to admit that. He thinks of the gladiator in the arena. Live as a gladiator, he tells himself. Present your throat to the blade without flinching. He looks at his wife, Paulina. She is young, beautiful, devoted. She sees the soldiers. I will not live without you, she says. I have learned from you that an honorable death is better than a shameful life. He feels a pang of fierce human love, a crack in the Stoic armor. He tries to dissuade her, but she is resolved. She wants to be a Stoic heroine. So be it, he says. We will leave this party together. The centurion brings the order. Die. The philosopher nods. He asks only for his will, to leave gifts to his friends. The centurion refuses. Then, the philosopher says, I leave you the most precious thing I own, the pattern of my life. He turns to Paulina. They embrace. Then, the blades. They cut the veins in their arms. The blood comes. But for him, the old man, the blood is tired. It flows slowly, refusing to drain the life from him. He is dehydrated, malnourished. His body clings to life with a stubborn animal instinct that defies his philosophical will. He watches Paulina bleeding faster. The pain of watching her die is greater than his own. He realizes that if he stays, he will falter. He orders the slaves to take her into another room. Go, he whispers. Do not let my pain weaken your resolve. He sends her away to die alone, so that she may die well. He is left alone with his slow death. The pain in his legs is excruciating. He cuts the veins in his ankles. Still, the blood does not flow fast enough. He asks for poison. Remembering the hemlock of Socrates, he drinks. But his body is cold. The poison sits in his stomach, a cold lump, useless. He is denied even the easy exit. And so we return to the mist, to the caldarium, the warm water, the steam. He is carried into the bath. The water warms his chilled limbs, encouraging the blood to flow. He feels the steam entering his lungs, that familiar tightness, the old friend asthma returning for one last embrace. He looks at the steam rising, dispersing, becoming invisible, anima, breath, soul. He cups the water in his hand. It is warm, like the waters of the Pleiades in the summer. He pours it out onto the floor. To Jupiter the Liberator, the silence expands. The noise of Rome recedes. It becomes a hum, distant and meaningless, like the sound of the sea from high up on the cliffs of Corsica. He closes his eyes. He is back in the olive grove in CORDUBA. The wind is rustling the silver leaves. The river is flowing, carrying everything to the sea. The squall at sea is ending. The ship is coming into port. Life is long enough, he thinks, if you know how to use it. He exhales. The breath leaves him, mingling with the steam, indistinguishable from the air. Free at last from the cage of bone and the cage of gold. The water is still. The philosopher is free.